So we're going to hear about a brief history of public washrooms with Jayne Armstrong. Jayne is a project manager for 880 Cities and is dedicated to equitable placemaking and city building. She recently graduated from the Master of Science in Planning program at U of T and is excited to put her studies into action. Jayne, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Kara. Okay, just jumping right in, we'll be talking about a brief history of public washrooms, a little bit of Europe, and a little bit of Toronto, and we'll see where it takes us. So, yep, just what I said. This was my agenda slide talking about origins of public washrooms and looking forward to the future as well. This was inspired by, of course, Toronto Public Space Committee and Kara, but also Leslie Lowe, who is the author of No Place to Go, spoke to her a while ago about really designing for dignity, which is a project that I'm working on personally, about how to make people experiencing homelessness, unhoused people, comfortable in public spaces. We want to design for inclusivity and being comfortable. So we were talking to her about how public washrooms play a huge role into this, and the impacts of COVID are unfathomable for unhoused people. If you and I think that we can't have an extra cup of coffee when we're walking through the town because we don't know when we're gonna find a public washroom, just try to put yourself in the shoes of unhoused folks during this time. So just a quick introduction to the history of public washrooms. This is a communal washroom in ancient Rome. And it was communal because washrooms were unsafe spaces as you were in a very vulnerable place. So as a result, the Roman goddess of Fortuna was believed to protect latrine users from dangers. This is also like health dangers, unknown contractions of diseases from washrooms, as well as being vulnerable to attack, which is a pretty awful thing to consider when you're using the washroom. I bet ancient Romans would love the Japanese example of public washrooms in park space. When no one is in it, they become transparent. When someone is using the washroom, it becomes opaque. This just helps you see who's in there, if it's clean and whatnot. A modern day guardian for the public washroom. And this was a very blurry example of the first recorded flushable toilet. This was in ancient Greece. And this is a medieval toilet as well in a castle. And all the contents would filter out into the moat, as we're sure we've seen. This is an ancient painting from the city of York in England, and they're called pissing holes. You are to lean your butt over the river Ouse, and often people would fall in, as this funny ancient painting depicts. So, of course, we're all very interested in public health and public safety nowadays, and here we have John Snow and the Broad Street Pump, which he tied back to cholera outbreaks. This was really the birth of public health and planning, which we all clearly are interested in. But the ideas around sanitation and access to vital resources remains imperative today. And this is just an example from San Diego, but hepatitis A is on the rise in San Diego during COVID-19 because of lack of access to clean water, sanitary situations that you can clean yourself with. And Toronto actually is one of the highest, or the highest city in Canada with hepatitis rates, and it is increasing. Hepatitis is contracted like a fecal oral route, among other ways. So this really tells you about the lack of sanitation and access to keeping ourselves clean nowadays. And just talking about the gendered aspect to washrooms, I try to trace back where did this start, if washrooms were communal and social things before. So the first gendered segregated public restroom on record was a temporary setup in a Parisian ball in 1739. There was a chamber box for men in one room and for women in another, and it was a novelty, something that was eccentric and fun, more like a joke, but we've really codified that into how we plan and build our washrooms. And we're just now recently trying to make them gender neutral by calling them water closets or adding a third option. So trying to slowly get back away from that gendered aspect. And of course, we know the gendered aspect to washrooms is a result of, this is a product of gendered washrooms. and this is a product of gendered washrooms as well. These are pissoirs in Paris. They've been around in Paris forever, where men, those who need to use urinals can do so safely in public. But the washroom access for women is obviously not equitable, and not few and far between for women moving through public space in cities. So in talking about modern public washrooms in Europe, sorry, yeah, if anyone's been through travel through Europe, when you know that there's a lot of pay for entry systems, but this often comes with an attendant and a clean quality public washroom. There is a barrier, of course, to use, but sometimes they're 50 pence, which is like 50 cents. So more, they're provided more, but there's still that barrier to access. But versus North America, where we see many more barriers. So this was a really great article by City Lab. Pay toilets are illegal in much of the US, and they shouldn't be. And this hilarious photo is people protesting the fact that public washrooms were provided, but they had a pay to use way. And then there was a promise that it was associated with the removal of pay for use public washrooms. The promise was that there'd be free indoor public washrooms that were, of course, more accessible, but that promise never came to fruition, and we're in the situation that we are in as a result of these broken promises. We're also in this situation where we have a lack of public washrooms in our cities due to the impact of autocentric planning. This is something that I discussed with Leslie Lowe. We've designed our cities, especially in North America, to be places that you pass through. When we build at the scale of the pedestrian, that's when we build things that pedestrians need to be able to spend time, quality time, spend money, walk through space. We provide them with washrooms and amenities, but when we're planning at the level of the car, it's all about privatized interests, private spaces, yeah, to the detriment of public good. And of course, our public spaces can look like this, and we're relying on private amenities as a result. So like Kara was saying, paying to use the washroom is also even associated with using the bathroom at McDonald's, Burger King, or Starbucks, where you feel obligated to get a drink or something just to use the washroom. Even then, if you don't purchase something, there's still a washroom code. So there's very many barriers to using private amenities, but we've become so reliant on these private amenities to provide a public good. And so as a result, we see things that it's called a urinary leash that really references the gender disparity in accessing washrooms. Women who are menstruating, women who are breastfeeding, anyone who has, Crohn's disease, any like health impacts require you to have a washroom more often than not. And so you need to have a mental mind map with your range of abilities in mind when moving through cities, and it makes just like living and trying to exist in public spaces very difficult. So you have that urinary leash where you know that I can access a public washroom in a library, or I can access the public washroom in Timmy's, and I'm going to try to stay around that. But in COVID, all of those things that you used to rely on just aren't there anymore. So I'm finally getting to Toronto's public washrooms specifically. Spacing magazine, Chris Bateman wrote a great article called "What Happened to All of Toronto's Public Washrooms?" And this one is at Spadina and College. It is currently buried where the streetcar is, which is super interesting to think about, that there might still be some underground ancient water pipes and cool sinks, all of that buried under the streetcar. But the Broadway, which was Methodist Church, which was used to be right next to that intersection, protested it, saying it was immoral to be doing private things so publicly. There was also a public washroom at Queen and Parliament that was once again a source of contention, led to a lawsuit in which the Blue Marty Millionaire building that used to be at the corner, a judge ruled in their favor and said that a public toilet had injured the property's value. This was a public washroom just for men. There's no women access here. This was at Broadview and Danforth, and it was called a den of sin. There's a huge morality aspect to providing public washrooms in Toronto, especially. If anyone does a dive in Toronto's history, we are very puritanical. Protestant like I've heard people call it Calvinist roots as well. We're all very hoity-toity back in the day. And people have also attributed this to the NIMBYism we deal with nowadays. It's all about morality and ethics instead of providing something that would just be a commonplace public service otherwise. There's also a gendered aspect to how we build our public washrooms. So buildings were mostly designed by male engineers, which meant there was very little understanding for the sociological aspect of toilets. And to this day, it has impacts as there's more toilets for men than there are for women. Like this, there wasn't even any women's options to start. Leslie Lowe said that this is a result of the perceptions of women, and misogyny, of course, is rooted within everything. But women who engaged in public washrooms were seen as public women, which was slang back in the day for prostitute. So of course there's some stigma there. And then I think all of this, like Kara was saying, leads into just, misogynistic understandings of women and their needs. There used to be a luxury sale tax on tampons, which should be just a basic right. And we've seen some public washrooms as well have free pads and tampons available, which is really great. So back to why we removed some public washrooms, of course, was the understanding of morality. But in 1921, the decision was made by the City of Toronto that there's a public washroom, that the public washroom strategy would include a washroom at every gas station, which was the first passing on of the burden of a public good passed on to private companies. And bringing us just a huge jump into the future, there's been some push towards having automated public toilets. And then this header here was, are we trading 450,000 toilets for bikes? Discussing how some municipal funds were reallocated from public washroom strategy in partnership with Astral to bail out what was Bixi and what is now Bike Share. I'm not against Bike Share at all. I love them very much, but I think both can coexist as other cities have done. We just need a reprioritization of our priorities, but also funds. These are very expensive items to maintain and service, which is why we see closed washrooms during the winter months, but we will get to that. So as a result, people have had to be creative. This app shows you where the nearest public washroom is anywhere in Canada. We can see that this was published in 2017. So this is not just something that we need now during COVID times, but we've always needed. And it really speaks to the just lack of public services that we've provided to our city dwellers. So you often see signs like this: restrooms are for paying customers only. But during COVID, we've hoped to see more signs like this. Library restroom is open, but all other library services are closed. So public services have had to really shift and provide amenities that are needed right away in terms of accessing the public, providing public access to use restrooms. But we often, more often than not, see this. Sorry, no public washrooms due to COVID-19, instead of shifting it, saying we can provide washrooms due to COVID-19 and closing everything else. So this is just a quote from a great article I was reading. The pandemic has made the world so small. It's taken so many things away. To lose the ability for a real walk was just a freedom I was not willing to give up. I'd rather risk peeing my pants than being confined at home. And while we advocate for staying at home and social distancing if you're not vaccinated, it's just telling you about the need to get out. Public space is so important, but it's hard to be out for long periods of time. This is some things that we spoke about last meeting. I make sure I dehydrate myself when I go out. And we've also spoke about the antithesis to city building is not providing amenities for people to want to spend their time. And in cities where they can't have their basic needs met aren't attractive cities. This was one of my favorite memes from the pandemic. And of course, we know how important taking care of our health wellness is, as we saw with the war on toilet paper. And some people have been really creative during COVID and created free to pee locations. There's also those, as we spoke about last time, who've released washroom codes to private washrooms. And I think this is a great start for discussing the importance of of public washrooms during COVID and in the future. They're effective tools to fight against viral infections, not just COVID-19, but also hepatitis, like we were talking about. And so the impact of COVID-19 on public washrooms, there's less of them. So hepatitis is on the rise. There's also the need to support our unhoused neighbors who are, impacted the most by closed amenities. And of course, it also impacts like walkability, shoppability, tourism, comfortability, and cleanliness of our public spaces. So this was part of an initiative that Joe Cressy wrote about on his site about some recreation sites that would be open for public washrooms, for showers, for hand washing. These were recreation sites that have been closed but have been reopened for people experiencing homelessness. And this is just like a point to make that it's so important to open our public services, because people have been using this farm field for emergency washroom use during the pandemic. It's really showing you like how desperate people have been for a public washroom. So that was in Hamilton, and then in response to that, Hamilton did set up porta potties downtown, but when businesses began to reopen during the last wave, they took them away again. So it's even like the municipal acknowledgement that we're relying on private services for businesses to provide us with the washroom, and that's just not right. So in talking about winterized public washrooms, of course, a lot of our washrooms are not winterized. So from May to October, some washrooms are open, but out of 187, I think only 17 are open year round. And then portable washrooms were deployed during COVID during in high use locations. But we need to acknowledge that our cities are all season, and to be outside in public space also requires washrooms. I think part of the lack of winterized washrooms is also a fear of homeless folks. God forbid that they have a place to warm themselves. There's also a fear of illicit drug use, which is often very hyperbolic in nature when we're discussing about public washrooms. And this is what we're dealing with right now. This is, I think it was San Jose, set up socially distanced places for unhoused folks to stay the night. So repurposing of parks and public spaces. But tell me where the washrooms are here. There is some social services nearby, but when we don't discuss public washrooms in like an all-encompassing servicing capacity, then we're totally just ignoring like our basic human rights. We all have to do these things, but it's also tied up in morality that it's such a taboo topic that, but we need to discuss it as we are here. So to really push forth with these 15-minute cities, there needs to be public washrooms. Not like we need to use the washroom every 15 minutes. Some might, but it's about making spaces comfortable and easy to be in. And when we talk about livable, age-friendly cities, we're also talking about public washrooms as well. We are building great outdoor spaces. We're building great transportation, places to socialize. But where's like the service provision for our basic needs? So that was it. Sorry if that was too long. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jayne.